Okay, welcome back. In this video, we are going to talk about how you can get your player to shoot bullets. So let's go ahead and get started with that. Before you start this video, make sure you've at least watched the video about how you can make a player that can move. So at this point, all I have is this, where I have my little player. If I press the A key, they move left. If I press the D key, they move right. Of course, when I release the key, they stop moving in that direction. So what I want to do is I actually want to move my player down where they can move left and right, but then they can shoot upwards, something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to here where I had P1, and here I said make the Y height divided by 2. I'm going to make the Y the player height. Let's see, minus 25, just because I know that the height of the player is 50, so half that's 25. Actually, you know what? I'll do minus 50. It doesn't have to be right on the bottom. Yeah, something like that's good. So I can move left or right. Cool. Now, if you went ahead and watched the other video about how to jump, that's also okay. This same code works no matter how your movement works. But cool, so for me, I got my player on the bottom. Now what we need to do is we need to make it where the player can shoot bullets such that the bullets go up this way on the screen. But to make that work, what I of course need to make a class for those bullets. So I'm going to make a new tab here. I'm going to call this class bullet. So I'm going to make the tab have the same name. So bullet, say the word class first, then the name of the class, and then I got my curly brackets. So let's give this thing some variables. So variables, what variables does a bullet need? Well, it needs an X and Y position. It also needs, for me, I'm going to make my bullet circles. So that means it needs a diameter. I could also give it a color if I wanted to. I don't think I need that at the moment. So now that I have this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, of course, make the constructor. The constructor, of course, tells processing how do you make a new bullet, like a new object or a new individual of this class, and we have to make sure that the name of this constructor function matches the name of the class. So the class is named bullet, so the constructor must be named bullet. Now, of course, the goal and job of the constructor is that it initializes every variable. But the question you always have to ask when initializing a variable is, like every time you make a bullet, which of these variables might be different every time you make a new bullet? Well, I know that as the player moves around and you're shooting, every bullet will have a different starting X and Y value. But they'll probably have the same starting diameter. At least that's how I'm going to design mine for now. So since I know each new bullet might have a different X and Y's, I need to make sure I have parameters for the X and Y. So let's go ahead and do that. For my X parameter, I'm going to call that starting X. For my Y, I'm going to call that starting Y. Now I just initialize all my variables here. So X is going to be equal to starting X. So it knows that the starting value of X is going to be this. So that's good. Same thing for Y. And then diameter. Since I don't have a parameter here, I can just make it whatever I want. I'm going to make it a pretty small number, maybe like 5. Cool. So now we have to think about what does a bullet do? Well, what a bullet does is it should be drawn on the screen, otherwise you can't see it. So let's make a function to do that. So avoid render. You can call this display or something like that, as long as you don't call it draw. If you call it draw, it's going to get confused with this draw function. So don't call it draw, but you can call it display or whatever. I like to call it render, so I'm going to call mine render. The way I'm going to, of course, render my bullet is just with my circle function, and I use the variables x, y, d for my bullet. So that's one thing. So that's a render function. What else should a bullet do? Well, a bullet should also be able to move. In my case, I specifically want my bullet to move up. So that's how I'm going to code mine. If you want your bullet to move differently, you just code it differently. So you make it work however you need it to for your game. But I'm going to have a little function here called move. like that. And I'm just going to say, cool, I'm going to make my bullet move up. And I just realized if I want it to move up, I need a variable to represent how fast it moves. So I'm going to come up here. Let's make another variable called speed. And of course, if I make a variable here, I have to initialize it in my constructor. For me, I'm just going to hard code it to something. I'm going to make it maybe 15. Cool. So my move function here, if I go to my whiteboard really quick, if I have a little bullet and it's moving up this way, I know if I'm moving up, I'm changing the y. And of course, if I move up, the y is not only changing, it's actually, more specifically, it is decreasing. So I need to subtract from the y. And so that's what I need to code in here. So I'm going to say y minus equals speed. And of course, this is the same as saying y equals itself minus speed. Cool. And so now, just to test this, I'm going to make a new bullet here. We actually won't keep this code, but I want to just show you how this works. So I'm going to make a new bullet called B1. I declare it up top. I'm going to initialize it in my setup. So B1 equals, and of course, to initialize your bullet, you need to call your constructor. You do that by saying equals new bullet. And if this is all I say, you see it freaks out. It says bullet does not exist, the bullet function, and that is, of course, because it doesn't. The function that does exist is the bullet function that takes in two parameters, an x and y. So I have to make sure this also takes in an x and y. So I'm going to say, for now, I'm going to say for the x something like 300, and then for the y something like 700. And now to test this in my draw, I'm going to say b1.render and b1.move. Okay, now pay attention, because if it's moving, we might lose track of it pretty quick. I'm going to press play. Let's see what happens. Oh, there it goes. I don't know if you saw that. I'm going to press play again. Keep an eye about right here on the screen, about this X position. Pew! There he goes. Just a little guy. I might actually make that diameter a little bigger for y'all to see, of course. But you can make it whatever size you want to. But yeah, it's got a little bullet. It's moving around. So that's very good. Of course, what's happening right now is this bullet is popping up kind of at a random spot. It's not responding to a player key press. If I press play, for me, I want it when I press the space bar, I can shoot. If I press the space bar, no new shooting, right? So what we have to do is we need to adjust our code so we make a new bullet every time I press the space bar. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, this doesn't work. Us just making a new bullet B1 and just putting it somewhere, that doesn't work, because that's not responding to our player, right? So I'm actually going to get rid of this code. Get rid of B1 here, and get rid of it up here. Now what I do want to do is I want to make a new bullet every time I press the spacebar. Well, what that means is I need to actually make an array list to store any bullet that I make. So let's go ahead and do that. If you forgot the syntax to make an array list, review that lecture. But the type of thing that I'm making is an array list, so I type out array list. What type of thing does this hold? Where it holds bullets. So I'm going to put less than symbol bullet, greater than symbol, and then I name my variable. I'm going to call this bullet list. So this is declared. Now what I can do is in my setup I can initialize this. So I'm going to say bullet list equals a new array list, less than symbol. What type of thing does it hold? Well, it holds a bullet. Close that off with a greater than symbol, and then put your parentheses. These parentheses, of course, means this is a constructor, so I'm calling the constructor for the class array list. So cool. Okay, so this makes the list, but how do we add something to the list? Well, I want to add something to the list whenever I press the spacebar. Oh, so really quick, in the draw, I have my B1 stuff still here. Make sure to delete that. But I want to make a new bullet and put it in the list whenever I press the spacebar. So let's go on back down to the key pressed function, and let's add an if statement to check to see when I press the spacebar. So if key equals, and the way to check to see if you're pressing the spacebar is you put a single quote, and then you literally click space. and then put your single quote again. So there's just an empty space here. This is how you check to see if you're pressing the space bar. And so what I want to do when I press the space bar is I want to add a new bullet to my array list. So I'm going to say bullet list dot add, and what do I want to add to my array list? Well, I want to add a new bullet. I want to make a new bullet. So I'm going to say new bullet. Call my bullet constructor. Now it's going to be mad. And it's mad because my bullet constructor expects an x and y. So what x and y do I put here? Well, for now, if I just put something like, 300, 700, that's going to only put a bullet at this position. But that's not what we want, right? What we want is we want the bullet to come from the player. So instead of doing that, I'm actually going to say, cool, put the bullet at player 1 X and player 1's Y. So that's going to make it where whenever I make a new bullet, it's going to be made at this position, at the player's position. Okay, cool. Now you'll notice if I press play, press the spacebar, nothing's happening. But if I print out, print line, bullet list dot size, like the number of bullets in the list. Right now if I press 0, or right now it says 0, excuse me. But if I press the space bar, it goes up by 1, press it again, 2, press it again, again. So there are bullets being added to the list, we're just not seeing them. And the reason for that is because we have not called the render function for any of our bullets. Silly us, right? So what we need to do, of course, is that all of our bullets are kind of stored inside the array list. So if we want to render those bullets that are stored in the bullet list, we need to loop through that list. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to do that with our enhanced for loop that we talked about in class. So I'm going to put a little comment here. For loop that goes through all bullets. The way you make this loop is going to be the word for. And what type of thing is in this list? Well, it is a bullet. And then we have to make a name for a local variable that represents the name of any particular thing in the list. I'm going to call it something like a bullet. So for some bullet named a bullet in, the way you say the word in is with the colon, in bullet list, what do we want to do to a bullet? Well, I'm going to say a bullet.render, so we render that bullet. I'm going to say a bullet.move as well. So now if I press play, press the space bar, you see a bullet came from the player. Pew, 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 pew. Now if I move to the left, pew, 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 bullets are coming from me, bullets are coming from here, and as I can just move around, the more I press the space bar, the more bullets I get. So that's great. We're pretty much done in terms of making it shoot bullets, which is good. But there is one thing I want to point out. If I come here and I say, cool, if I print out the number of bullets in my list, so if I do bullet list.size again, bullet list.size, you'll see if I press play, if I spawn a bunch of bullets, they live forever. They stay in that list forever. Now, that's not a big problem right now, but if someone was playing this game for a while, if they just kept shooting bullets out, at some point they're going to have hundreds or thousands or maybe even tens of thousands of bullets, which means your game's going to really lag because processing is going to remember all of these, and it's going to slow down your program, right, if you play long enough. So what we want to do is we want to actually remove any bullet that goes beyond the screen. Now, the way you do this, the way you remove something from an array list is a little bit funny. So how do we do this? Well, what we need to do is we need to go inside our bullet class, and we're actually going to make a Boolean to represent if the bullet is destroyed or should be inactive or something like that. So I'm going to call my Boolean maybe something like is or should remove. I'm going to call it should remove. And I'm going to start off should remove. I'm going to initialize it in my constructor, should remove, as false. So that way it's not removed right away. And then inside this, I'm going to make maybe a new function. I'm going to call this function maybe something like check remove. And now this is where we make should remove true if it should be removed. Well, when should a bullet be removed? Well, I'm thinking in my case, it should be removed whenever the bullet goes past the edge of the window on the top. Now, if you're like on the left side shooting to the right, or if you're shooting to the left or shooting in all directions, you'll check maybe different things than me, but the logic is the same. So for me, my bullets should be removed when they're past the top of the screen. So the y value of the top of the screen is y equals 0. So if I'm above that, y is less than 0 up here. So what I can do is I can check that. So if y is less than 0, let's space that properly. If y is less than 0, should remove becomes true. So that means this Boolean becomes true. Now this alone doesn't do anything. So if I press play and shoot a bunch of stuff, you see they're not being removed yet, but now the program knows they should be removed. So we can use this Boolean to tell processing when to remove them. So how do we do that? Well, what I would love to do is I would love to go inside this for loop here and say something like this. I would love to say if a bullet dot should remove is true, then remove the bullet, right? It'd be great if I could just say bullet list dot remove a bullet. And this, you see there's no errors, right? Like it's cool. But you'll see if I press play and shoot something, oh, is it working? Oh goodness. No, something's funny here. Oh, something is funny. I never called my check remove function. So make sure to call that. Silly me. A bullet check remove. This function makes remove or should be removed true if it goes past the window. And notice if I rerun this, put my code over here, put this over here. If I do this, notice that as soon as it tries to remove a bullet, I actually got an error and my program froze. It's freaking out. What this error is called concurrent modification exception. What a succinct, easy to understand error message, right? But let's talk about what this means. What this error means is that I am trying to change the array list while I'm looping through it, which can cause issues. And so let's kind of think about it. Here's my array list. We can think of it as like a list of slots, where this thing is bullet 1, this is maybe bullet 2 in the array list, this is bullet 3 in the array list. And so let's imagine what happened here, right? Let's imagine that this one is good, this one should be removed, and this one is good. Well, when we loop through this, we start with this one, right? When we go to this one, should this one be removed? Well, no, it shouldn't, so this one's good. So we don't have to worry about that. So then we look at this one. Should this one be removed? Well, in this case, yeah, that one should be removed, right? So what we do is we say, cool, we remove it. So we delete all this stuff. And then what it does is actually takes this array or this slot over here and it pushes it against it. So it actually, what it does is it makes a new array list that looks like this, B1 and then B3. Because it actually slides this on over to here. But then what it does is it then checks the third slot. Because when it started the loop, there were 3 slots, so it still tries to check the third, but now it doesn't exist. So it freaks out. Oh my gosh, it doesn't know what to do with that. And so things kind of get messed up if you remove something from the list while you loop through it from the beginning to the end. Now, there is a way to fix this. It's a little sneaky. So let me kind of talk you through it. The way to fix this, if we have the same situation, B1, B2, B3, got these 3 guys here, and we'll have the exact same situation where B1 is good, B3 is good, but B2 is bad, should be removed. Watch what happens here. If I, instead of looping from the beginning going forward, if instead I start at the end and go backwards, watch what happens. Well, if I go to B3, should it be removed? No, it's all good, so we don't have to worry about that. So then it goes to B2. Should it be removed? Well, yes, it should, so it removes it. That means it removes it, and it makes a new array list that looks like this. B1, B3. But now what it does is it moves this, that the one it's looking at, it moves it over to the left one more time to here, and it's totally okay. Nothing is messed up here. So it turns out, if you want to remove something from your for loop, you have to start at the end and then go backwards. And then it works okay. So let's go ahead and do that in our code. I'm going to come on in here. And so let's do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another for loop here. And this is something you probably have not seen before, but that's okay. I'll walk you through it. This is going to be for loop that removes unwanted bullets. Cool. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to say for, and it's going to look actually a lot like a for loop that you maybe did early in the semester with checkerboard and things like that. I'm going to make a little local variable here. I'm going to call it I. I is short for index here. And I want to start at the end of my array list. So I is going to equal to bullet list dot size minus 1. And you might be thinking, what the heck is this, Chris? Bullet size minus 1? Where'd you get that? Well, remember, if we have an array list that looks like this right here, the index is the position. So the position of this guy, that's the index, right, of this guy. And, in most things, in most aspects of human life, we'd say this thing is in the first slot. But for computers, they don't start counting at 1. They start counting at 0. So this has an index of 0. This has an index of 1. This has an index of 2. So the index of the end is 2. But what's the size of the array list? Where the size of the array list is the amount of things. The amount of things here is 3. So that means if we want to get the index of the last thing, we can't just put the size. It's 1 too big. We have to do the size minus 1. So that is how I got this right here, size minus 1. So our index starts at the end. And we want to keep looping while I is greater than or equal to 0. Because once it's less than 0, if you're less than 0, that means you're looking at something here, a negative index. That doesn't exist, so we don't want that. And then we say, what should happen to I? Well, it should go down by 1 every time. So we can say minus equals 1. And a short way of saying that would be I minus minus, if you want to put it that way. Maybe to make it clear to you guys, I'll put I equals itself minus 1. Cool. Now what do? Well, we just say cool. I'm going to make a local variable. Am I? No, I'm not. I'm just going to do something like this. So I'm going to take this if statement. I'm going to remove it from this other for loop. So I'm going to cut it. Then I'm going to paste it in here. Now it's going to freak out because it does not know what a bullet is. That's no problem. I can redefine a bullet here by saying a bullet equals to bullet list dot get I. So I is the index. It starts at the end, and it goes down by 1 every time it loops. So get the thing with this index I. And then if that thing should be removed, then remove it. And because this for loop starts at the end of the array list and goes backward, it does not cause that error. So let's give that a shot. Shoot. Okay. That's okay. Check. So notice no error. I can keep going. Watch what happens to the size of my list as well. If I click and I shoot, it goes to 1. But then when that bullet goes past the window, it goes to 0. Which means if I just go crazy, shoot a bunch of bullets, they get removed dynamically over time, no matter how many I have. This means that no matter how long I play this game, no matter how many bullets I make, it will not freeze up or lag out on me. So yeah, so that's how you make your player shoot. In the next video, I'll talk about how you can do collision detection between the bullet and an enemy, and then how you can delete the enemy from the game when it gets hit. So I'll see you in that next video.